Hello and welcome back to Garry's Garage, and in this episode I'm going to stop procrastinating about doing this wiring. So if you were watching last time, you'll have seen that I managed to get the heater sorted in the car, which is a really good thing because that obviously is going to determine where the next things go, and that is this wiring. And as you can see, it's a bit of a mess. It's been hacked about 2 or 3 times over the last 5 years. It's had a new ECU, it's had a piggyback ECU taken off of it, it's had various things spliced into it over the time, and now is the time definitely to try to sort all this out once and for all. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is try to strip this back a bit, tidy it up, and then get the key components, which are going to be the 2 fuse boxes and also the ECU, and figure out where they're going to be mounted. So I have quite a jumble of wires, as you can see, and most of this lot was stuffed up under the dash. There was a plug that goes off to the front to rear loom, which is here somewhere, that one I believe, and I think that one goes off to the front panel down the outside of the body, or the other way around. These are the ones that went through the bulkhead and to the engine. That one is for the throttle pedal, and the rest of this bunch over here went off behind the dash to all the various things behind there, switches and dials. And then there's the 2 fuse boxes. So it's all kind of in a bit of an order, somewhat, but I did all of these as individual looms and they just get a bit messy. So I think what I need to do is strip it all back, try to keep them maybe in these kind of bunches, but the first thing to do will be figure out where I can mount this fuse box and the ECU. And if I can squeeze them up under the dash again and make them look nice, that will be quite good. But otherwise I need to search for an alternative. So let's see what we can do. Okay, first step is the ECU is disconnected. So being an Evo 1 to 3 plug-in version, it has these 3 connectors here, and then all the extras have to come from 2 expansion ports on the board, and that's what this big bunch of connectors here is. So one of the tasks is to tidy this up, because I really don't like the way that I've done this, but it worked at the time. So step 1, find a home for that. And there is the internal fuse box and ETAX unit, which has a nice bunch of cables going to it. And unfortunately, this fuse box doesn't really have any easy way of disconnecting it. So that is probably going to have to come along with the rest of the loom. And another thing that needs tidying up is things like relays and fuses. So I have 2 relays here, which are, I believe, the main relay to turn on the ECU, and also the fuel pump control relay, which are on quite a long length of cable that is probably not necessary. And especially when I have spare slots in this fuse box for relays where I've removed systems from the car. So it makes perfect sense to get rid of these and just wire them up into the fuse box. I've also got this relay here and this fuse, and that is for the oxygen sensors, which plug into this bunch of wiring here, and that is so that they will only turn on once the engine is running. because I had an issue where I was sitting, tuning the car, setting things up. The oxygen sensors were warm, and then I started the engine and a big blast of cold air goes down the exhaust and thermally shocks the O2 sensors and they just die. Do that too many times and they die. So that's the reason for that. And again, that's another relay and fuse which can be moved into an existing fuse box. And there's just lots of little things like that that need to be tidied up. So I've got the original lid that comes off this that tells me what all of the fuses are for and all the relays are for. I need to now work out which of these extra ports I can use for my other relays and start to plan on a piece of paper what wires are going to go where. And the same for the internal fuse box. There may be some pins going into this that I can reutilise for other functions and just try to cut down on this bulk of wiring. So one of the first things I thought I'd do was try to draw out a bit of a wiring diagram to see roughly where I'm going to put everything. And with doing this, I've decided that I'm going to move the ECU over to the driver's side, because a lot of these cables do come from this kind of area, go to the dash and then obviously off to the engine on either side, and that leaves a bit more space for the fuse box and the relays and the ETAX unit, which gives the bongs when the doors open, and the intermittent wiper, amongst other things. That can all go back over on the passenger side, roughly where it was before, maybe in a slightly different position. So I started to put in some of the key components. I'm probably not going to flesh this out much more than this. Certainly not all the individual wires that go from things like the wipers and the indicators off to their various end locations. But by doing this, it's given me a rough idea of what I want, where, and roughly how I'm going to wire it up. I've also got out a print off from Club VR4 of the two fuse boxes and marked up what relays I need, what relays I don't, the same for the fuses, so that I can go through and make sure that all of those circuits are as they need to be. So this was quite a bit of time spent doing this, but definitely worthwhile doing, so that I'm not going into it totally blind again, and I've got a rough game plan of what I want to do.
Time after time, you're always right. Whoa. You never chase, yet hold me tight. Whoa. Give me up, don't you mind it? Never lost you and I cannot find it. Time after time, I think you lie. Let's get closer tonight.
That is most of the old electrical tape taken off and everything kind of unbunched. And it looks even more of a mess now, but you need to make a mess before you can make it tidier. So what I need to do now is figure out where I'm going to be putting the two fuse boxes. I'm thinking that this will probably go in about the same place, and possibly this, again, roughly about the same place up under the dash. But the ECU, I think I'm going to put over on the driver's side, because there's a nice gap there up in the corner, and it just gets some of the wiring off to the other side of the car and away from all of this stuff. So I'm going to need to dive in the car and figure out where these are going to go, and then I'm going to bring it back to the board and just do one wire and one connector at a time. Deep in one wire, route it where it needs to go, shorten it, lengthen it, remake it if necessary, and then once that one's done, move on to the next. And this is going to be a very tedious process, which is probably going to take multiple days. So I can't put it off, I've just got to do it. So I decided to put this fuse box back in the same place that it was. The wash bottle is here and I don't plan on moving that, so this vertical space here is basically unused, and that didn't really get in the way of the passengers' feet when they were sitting in having a ride. But the next thing is this, and that's that other fuse box. Originally that was up in this gap here, but I've now put this heater duct hose in the way, so that's not going to go back in that same location. So I need to try to figure out some way of doing it. A couple of options I've just looked at are either to put it up at the back there, up against the firewall, but there is a chance maybe that a passenger's feet will hit that. Or my preferred option is actually to tuck it round and put it in just behind this fuse box. Again, that's using that vertical space that's otherwise unused. I can tuck that in quite nicely once I tidy up these wires, and it still keeps the fuses and the relays easily accessible should I ever need to get to them when I'm at the side of the road. So I think that is going to be what I'm going to do. So I need to make up a bracket to hold it at the top and the bottom, and then I think what I will do is make up a jig based off these mounting positions, and then take it over to the bench with that jig, and I can then do the wiring with these in their sort of proper install locations, and make sure I've got enough room just to get them on and off the brackets so that I can put them back in the car and run all these cables neatly. So that's the fuse boxes plugged in over there, and there's various cables. There's some here that go off up to the steering column, and some of the plugs are plugged in at mostly the right length. Some of them, the plug's a bit short, like that one there has to go to the indicator stalk over there somewhere. This bundle down here is for the ECU, and this bundle here is what's going to go into the panel that's going to sit up under these heater controls. And then that grey plug there is the one that needs to run down the back down the car to the back. And these sort of straggle of wires over here are new circuits I've run in, or cables that need to just be fed into the loom somewhere. So there's quite a few cables that are going to need shortening, and a few that will need lengthening as well. And what I'm going to try to do is, if I need to lengthen a cable, then I will try to run it totally from one end to the other, if it goes plug to plug, with new pins on each end, or otherwise try to put as few joins in it as possible and just replace a few bits of wire. And where there's long loops of wire like this that's just too long, I can hopefully shorten those and route the wires accordingly. So it's going to be now, I think, trying to get just the right lengths on at least one wire per plug, and then either do the rest of them to length in the car or back on the bench. Over time I've amassed a little bit of wire, like a plastic tub full. And I've got quite a nice selection. It's got some oranges, some greens, reds, whites, yellows, and most colours that car manufacturers seem to use in wiring looms. Well, the base colours anyway. But because there's so many circuits in cars, especially of the late 90s, early 2000s ilk that I typically mess around with, the sort of 15 base colours just aren't enough to distinguish every single circuit, so they add different coloured tracers. So this one, for example, is black with a yellow tracer, and that's great. I've got a piece. Each one of these little bundles is about a metre and a half long, which for what I'm doing here is pretty good. But there's a few colours that I just don't have, and it would be really useful to have those colour combinations, but I don't really want to go and buy some cable. So I was trying to figure out how to do it, and then I came across a video by another one of the guys I follow on YouTube, Jafra, who's an American, and he messes around with Hyundais and Mitsubishis and all the kind of various other fun stuff that I like as well. And he's recently rewired his Hyundai that's running an Evo engine, and he came across exactly the same issue. He did not want to get 50 rolls of various different colours of wires when he might need half a metre of one and 10 metres of another, and not quite know up front what he wanted. So he did some searching, as I have done, to try to find something, a device that would put a coloured stripe onto a wire. And like me, he also failed. So he came up with a brilliant idea, which I have 100% totally stolen, and that is to make myself a wire striper. So what this is it's a couple of pieces of PVC electrical conduit with some joiners, and inside this centre section, it's cut down to just the right size with a hole in the middle to pass the wire through, and a couple of washers to hold the end of an acrylic paint marker. So what you do is you take one of your lovely markers. Let's go for a nice lilac-y pink colour, and you get that, shake it up and get it working, and you put it into one half, put the cap on, and that will give you one stripe. And if you want, you can repeat with a second box for the other side. So place them together and pull your wire through, and you get the acrylic paint transferred onto your wire. So I'll stick this in the vise and I will show you how it works. So I found this easiest to clamp it in the vise. So I have one half, which has a cap on the end and a washer to hold the end of the pen. That goes in somewhat like that. So I'll put that one down first and just clamp that loosely up in the vise. Then our centre section go on, and there is the hole that I will be feeding the wire through. Probably easier actually to feed the wire through before you start rather than afterwards. I'm going to go for this lovely dark green here, so we should end up with a dark green with a nice light violet stripe. So when you have your wire, this is a nice dark green, you can feed it through the two holes and place it down on top of your pen. And you could just put a single stripe on by doing this, but I quite like putting a double stripe on. It also then applies pressure from the pen on both sides. So that's both pens pushed down, and now what I can do is I can just very gently pull the wire through. And we end up with a nice green cable with a lilac stripe. So I shall do that for the rest of the colours I need as I build up the rest of the loom. So this has been in and out of the car a couple of times just to try to sort out some of the lengths, and this bundle through the middle here is looking so much neater. There's still quite a few wires that need to be added to it. For example, the ECU is now going over this side, so there's all the ECU cables that need to run across here and up through here, and they will go off to the passenger side of the engine. And there's also things like the OBD2 diagnostic connector that I haven't decided where I'm putting that yet, so that's just floating loose. And there's a bundle of stuff here that goes off to the front of the car and to the back. And there's also accelerator pedal, brake pedal and clutch pedal switches that need to go in and around somewhere, and mostly now it's the stuff that hooks up to the ECU. So with the main bit of the loom roughly to size and shape, the next thing to do is to figure out where I'm going to put the ECU casing. Now I've taken the ECU out so that I can mess around with this, and this is going to be going up here in this kind of kick space up here above the pedals, and that was otherwise just unused space. So I'm going to need to figure out how I can best mount this so that I can still get the connectors on and, more importantly, off again, preferably without removing the whole ECU. I'm going to poke my head under there and try to figure out where this is going to go, and I will be back in just a moment. So when I first put this up in here, I was fully expecting to be mounting it somewhere over here, sort of to the side of the accelerator pedal, near the top. You know, I could still get my hands round the top to put the cables on, but then I just kind of turned it round a little bit and put it in up, sort of up there, up at the top. And you know what? That actually sits in even better than I thought. It keeps it right above the pedals, totally out of the way of my feet. I will never kick that, not unless I'm doing something very, very strange in the car. It's well enough away from all of the brake mechanism, and the run of cables, which is probably going to come in front of those brake cylinders, is nice and easy to get in. And there will be the plugs going through to the engine bay somewhere around there, but that will be above this in the gap that it creates, and that's a nice little loop of cabling to get to that. So I think I'm going to make up some form of bracketry and fix that somewhere up there, and that will give me a good start on where to run all the rest of the cables. But unfortunately you'll have to come back next time to see how I get on with the ECU mounting and wiring, because I am completely out of time. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Garry's Garage.